Welcome listeners to episode 25 of the Running Guide podcast, where I aim to provide informative content and interviews with elite athletes and health professionals from around the world, like in today's episode, where I'm chatting to a highly experienced and reputable exercise physiologist whose vast knowledge and studies of strength and conditioning, injury rehabilitation, biomechanics, postural assessment, hydration, nutrition, rest and recovery, just to name a few, made securing this guest on the show a must. My guest worked as the high performance manager at Essendon Football Club for 10 years, GWS Giants for 4 years, was the sprint and relay coach at the 2000 Sydney Olympics, has worked with the Socceroos and within IPL cricket. My guest is kept busy, among other roles that we'll discuss further, running Quinn Elite Sports Services out of Double Bay, Sydney and South Yarra, Melbourne. Welcome to the Running Guide podcast, John Quinn.
Thanks a lot, Aston. I really like the sound of this bloke. I might have to meet him.
Yeah. Nah, mate, I'm really been looking forward to speaking to you. Just I feel you have so much wise knowledge to offer the listeners. So yeah, pretty cool, mate. Before we get into it, how did you first get into the world of exercise physiology and sports science?
I got into that through coaching, and I got into coaching through rugby league. When I was a young boy in country New South Wales, I used to play rugby league, and in fact, by the time I was 20, I played rugby league for 14 years, and I played representative football for the junior teams in Canberra, and they needed someone to referee, so I got into that. And there was a young team that needed a coach, and no one would take them on because they weren't that well behaved. And I put my hand up as probably about a 16, 17-year-old to coach these young 12-year-olds. And there was one boy in there that was particularly fast, and I suggested to him or his father, that he should get some athletics coaching. And his father said, "You think he would be good at it?" I said, "I think he'd be very good." And he simply responded, "When do you want me to bring him in?" Mm. And that moment I was born as an athletics coach. I was about 17 years of age, and we started an athletics club in the town that I was from, Yarra, in New South Wales. And that club grew and grew, and we had athletes. We were just really having fun, and it probably underpins a lot of my philosophy that you have to enjoy, just create something that people can enjoy being a part of. And it's not all just about winning. It's about being involved in something that makes you better for the work that you're putting in. And that's what we tried to create way back in the mid-'80s. And from there, I got identified from Little Athletics, and I moved to Sydney and became an education development officer for Little Athletics, travelling about 140,000 kilometres a year, almost like an evangelist, spreading the word of athletics and family fun and fitness. And at some point in there, I realised I needed to get qualified in a formal sense. And there was a degree being offered from the University of New South Wales in coaching, which I was really attracted to, but it also had exercise physiology. I'd never know what exercise physiology was, but I liked the idea of the coaching, so into it I went. So here I am talking to you, quite a few years later, and I'm still a coach, and I haven't stopped coaching in all those years. And I'm an exercise physiologist accredited with our body ESSA. And as you said in the intro, I work out of a clinic in Melbourne in South Yarra, and one here in Sydney in Double Bay.
Okay, well, let's just jump straight to that. What are you actually doing in those clinics?
Well, people can come to me for any number of injuries that they have. It may be that they've had a workplace accident, a slip or a fall. They've got a bad back from sitting in a terrible chair. But a lot of them are to do with movement. And with my background in high-performance sport, I bring a different dimension to that, whereas I look at how they move. And I'm not just really interested in the symptom. Sure, they might have a bad back or they might have a sore knee. That's the symptom. What's the cause of that? And so we go almost, it's like a bit of an investigation, and that's usually I have a look at their posture and what's their body, is it in alignment and so on. And that's corrected through exercise and strengthening, stretching exercises from my perspective. And I also will have a look at the move, and that could be simple walking. I can see people walking along the street and basically it jumps out that, they've got a bad hip or a bad knee or a bad shoulder, whatever. But it helps if they're running, and the faster they run, the more I see. So I'll often do a movement analysis of them as well, and then put that into a report, and away we go, and bring in the people that are needed in that, whether that be a doctor, a physiotherapist, massage therapist, or some other form of allied health.
Yeah, okay. So Let's talk about runners. When runners come into you with an injury, would you say, I mean, this is just a number, but would you say 90% of those injuries are created by poor biomechanics or sort of irregularities through muscular strength rather than an overuse thing?
A lot of athletes come in and I think they overload the same thing too often. So that can quite often be that, but it's exacerbated by the fact that their posture, their mechanics, and even their strength isn't at its optimum. So they sort of go hand in hand, and I think you've got to address it a multifactorial thing, which in a clinic setting isn't always that easy, because you then also have to have buy-in not only from that athlete but also the athlete's coach, and so long as they're prepared to buy in, then it's going to work. And I'll say to the patients I have, in fact, the people that run the clinic say I'm mad doing this, but I say it pretty much to every patient I have come in, that they're not going to get any result in less than 6 weeks. And what they need to do is do the program that I've set up for them, whether that be a strengthening, mobility, stability, or a movement program. They need to do that consistently over 6 weeks. If they can do that over 6 weeks and they do not get a result, they don't get a positive change, I will refund every dollar that they've invested in coming to see me. And fortunately, whether people are just shy or not, but I haven't had to refund a dollar just yet. So that's what I think, that you shouldn't have to pay for something you don't get the result. But at the same time, people have to do what you tell them to do. And if they just continue doing the same old thing, I mean, that's a definition of stupidity, doing the same thing over and over and thinking you're going to get a different result. And if the same thing over and over is leading you to get, shin splints, stress fractures, back soreness, whatever it might be, and you just keep doing the same thing over and over and over, well, sorry, you fall in the category of stupid.
Yep. So you're not necessarily referring someone over to a physiotherapist. You can actually write them a program once they leave the clinic to what they actually need to go to do to strengthen and condition that.
Oh, yes. I think it's becoming a very a separate area in Australian allied health, where physios have got a vital role, obviously, in the whole rehabilitation process. But an exercise physiologist, their area of expertise is actually in the prescription of exercise, which is beyond that of what you would find from your physiotherapist. I think they should work together. But initial stages of rehab, sure, the physiotherapist would devise that program, but then the rehab's handed over to someone that's more proficient in that return to full function, and that's the role of an exercise physiologist. And I've probably been really driven by that vision, if you like, having worked in AFL. So I worked 10 years in Melbourne with Essendon Football Club, and we had one of the best medical teams there, with doctors and physios that I've been fortunate enough to work with. And then subsequent to that, travelling with teams, but then coming to Sydney. And part of my role of coming to Sydney was actually to establish the team, which was in terms of the medical team and sports science team, to put the doctors and physios in place. And communication's vital there, and everybody knows their role. And it's so important when you're talking about rehab and return to play that it's a patient or an athlete-centred program, not an ego-centred one where I'm the one that got them back. That's irrelevant. It's the fact that we've got them back in less time than what we really thought would be, but being realistic in terms of the objectives and the goals that you're putting in front of that individual to get them back.
Yeah. As you'd be aware, us runners are pretty bad at doing our strength and conditioning, which I'll touch on again later. And generally, physiotherapists will probably never go broke, because generally we go in there, we want to get fixed so we can get running the next day, and they'll hand us a little program to go and do. And generally, most runners don't do it. They'll do it for 2 or 3 days, and they get back into the same old routine, the old bad habits, and the injury may not go away. It's probably just settled down, and then because they don't do that strength and conditioning work, sooner or later it bites them in the bum again. But
well, you're right, and sorry to talk over you there, but with the whole thing of, well, we all know that we don't apply common sense to ourselves. If I said to any of the listeners of this, if they're a runner and that I wanted to just start running, or I know somebody who wants to start running and they want to get fit, so we're going to put a program together for them and they're going to do it on Monday for the next 3 weeks, will that be enough to get them up for a 10K run? They'd look at you like you're a fool. Well, of course you need to do more than that, and the barest minimum I would suggest you need is a day on, day off, particularly as you're beginning, and allow the body to go through the training, adaptation, recover, training, stimulus, then recover, and so on. Well, the same thing applies for strength. And a cycle in terms of the body adapting is around about 6 weeks, 4 to 6 weeks. We work in general cycles. So that's why I have that deal with my patients and whatever that comes to the clinic, that if you're going to go down the strength path, then you need to allow to be doing 2 to 3 times a week, and you need to do it consistently, and you need to follow that for a 6-week period of time. And I think that if you aren't getting a positive result from that, then you're either doing it totally incorrectly or the programs are done. But it's more likely going to be incorrectly administered. But it probably also sounds a little bit reckless, but I've got to say at some point that for the athletes out there that are listening, that if you're not getting some form of little niggle or whatever, you're probably not training hard enough. So it's about taking your body almost to its limit there and then backing off. And whilst, we can talk about the mechanics and I obviously think that's vital, so too is the recovery. And I don't think that athletes, and the longer the athletes run, the greater the distance, the less time they seem to spend on it. But the harder you train, it has to be the harder you need to recover. Otherwise, you're in this state of continual decline, and ultimately your body's going to say, get stuffed. I'm going to have a rest.
Yep. Again and again, in my line of work, as I do a bit of coaching and I'm a personal trainer for most of my life, but there's a few things there that sort of made me think, and it's interesting you say that, about 6 weeks to get that adaptation process. And for some reason, I've always said that if I take on someone new or start them on a program, I always say, look, we're not going to worry too much for the first 4 to 6 weeks because there's this adaptation process that needs to take place, which is pretty much what you said. And I used to use this analogy, and it's a bit of a strange one if you can get it in your head, but like a huge big ball, like the old lotto ball that they used to advertise, and that was rolling at a certain speed in the wrong direction. And when we first start training, we basically have to pitch ourselves against that rolling ball and slow down the speed of the ball, which is happening in the first couple of weeks. And then we actually have to halt the speed of the ball, which is usually about a month. And then we need to start rolling that ball back in the right direction. And that's pretty much the way I used to explain it to them, and so they could sort of get it clear in their head. But just from personally, I know when I start a new strength and conditioning or just tweak my training a little bit, it usually takes about that time before I go, oh wow, I'm actually starting to see the results now. So, and it's interesting you say that, and to remind people that, because clearly when people start something new, I mean, even a runner who says, okay, I've listened to the Running Guy podcast, listened to John Quinn, he said, get in the gym. They've got to understand that when they start doing that strength and conditioning, that they are going to have that muscle soreness, but that, like you said, that muscle soreness is a good thing. It's a sign that without that inflammation, without that damage to that muscle belly, you're not going to get that repair and that growth, like you said, and that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. No, that's your body giving you the signal that it's adapting to this whole process. But I think people generally don't listen to their body well enough. And I remember when I was first introduced by, actually, he's a very, very world-renowned now professor in the area of sports science. He's based here in Sydney at University of Technology, Aaron Coots. And I involved Aaron in Essendon Footy Club. He subsequently got involved with Carlton Football Club, and he's been involved with different sporting groups and teams all around the world. But when he came in, it was almost too simple, this whole concept of rate of perceived exertion, or RPE, where you simply have a scale from 1 to 10, and you rate how you felt on that. 10 being that, that's the most extreme thing I've ever done, through to 1, I should have just stayed in bed, I suppose. But you just rate that by the duration. So if you went for a 60-minute run and you multiply it, you ranked yourself at 6, you just have 6 by 60 is 360 arbitrary units, it's called, and just graph and chart that. And you'll be able to see how your body's adapting to sessions and to the whole program over the course of whether that be a week, a month, or even a whole year. And I've now become such a fan of that I actually use it as part of my periodised plan to just monitor how my athletes are coping from that. And, if people are interested in that, just go onto the App Store and find rate of perceived exertion, or RPE. It's a fabulous tool, and it's very underrated. And the most important thing about it, it's all about you. It's just your rate of how you perceive the effort that you put in. And if you're honest with yourself, you're going to go a long way to preventing injuries.
No, I totally agree. And obviously some people go, oh, it's not accurate, it's subjective. Someone's rate 6 will be different to someone else's 6. And I always say, well, it doesn't matter what someone else rates that exercise as. It's what you know what it felt like last time, and if it's harder, then you just go from a 6 to a 7, and then eventually you start to see that pattern. So it's all about, and yeah, you're right. A lot of people aren't recording the way they feel. There's a bit of a message out there now from high performance coaches such as yourself and others to put some sort of score, even just write down how you felt, were you tired and all the rest of it, and even going as far as recording sleep patterns and nutrition. Because I know I definitely want to talk with you further about this because those things are so important. Like you mentioned, recovery. Now I'm gonna come back to all that because it's I know it's really big for you that topic, and I want to learn more about it. But I want to head back to AFL because I'm just interested. I'm a big AFL fan. I'm a Swanee, but I just love the sport.
Never mind.
Yeah, I know. Never mind. Yeah, don't hang up on me. It's only because
I wouldn't hang up, but I might be able to send you a couple of other enrolment forms where you can get the Bombers and the Giants to send you something, mate.
Yeah. Look, it's just because I grew up there, mate, and it's all good. And when I lived in Melbourne, it used to give all the blokes down there something to complain about. So that so they hate the Swans down there. That's fair enough. But with, obviously you've been there for, let's call it, 10, 15, 20 years in the sport of AFL. So you must have observed or maybe even implemented within that time different processes in preparing a player for season, for the season, as far as, injury risk management and injury rehabilitation. Because the game's changed a lot. I'm sure you agree. So do you actually have to go around preparing that player differently to what you did back, in the early 90s or?
Oh, yes.
Yep.
I think that our understanding of the athlete has changed, but not only that, the game has changed.
Yep.
It's a far more, I think it's a far more defensive game now. I think even 4 or 5 years ago it was a far more attacking game, which meant there was a lot more aggressive running. Now in the game of AFL, it's more a defensive thing. So you've got to have a lot more isometric strength and ability to hold your ground, and probably a little bit more need for agility from a standing start. There's more a demand on it now. But the great blessing I had when I first went to Essendon, I'd never even seen a game. I'd never even watched a game on TV. In the intro, I said to you, I'd played rugby league. I had no interest in AFL. And I had a phone call out of the blue from a guy called Kevin Sheedy. He wanted to know if I would come there and how he'd identified me. I was employed by the AIS in Canberra as a sprints coach, and they put me on a secondment to Tasmania. So I was down in Tasmania for 6 years as the head coach in the Tasmanian Institute of Sport. And that was such a fabulous experience because it exposed me to not only having to put a program in place in a state, but also I got to travel the world and see some of the best facilities and setups right across the world and meet some of the best people. But whilst I was in Tasmania, I did some consulting with other people in the programs. A lot of those were these young kids that were trying to get picked up in the draft camp for the AFL. So I didn't really mind. I just showed them how to do speed and change of direction and maybe modify their strengths. And, a lot of these boys were going off and getting drafted. And when they were saying, what's happening in Tasmania, you boys are getting a bit quicker, my name floated up to the top. And Kevin Sheedy had the foresight to give me a call and got me to come to the Bombers. That was at the end of 98. And in 99, we missed out on the grand final by 1 point, got picked by Carlton in the preliminary final. That's an experience that will never leave me.
Yeah.
And then, of course, we had the record-breaking year in 2000 where Essendon just dropped one game in the whole year, and that was a surreal year because I was involved with the grand final and had a little bit of time to celebrate before I boarded the plane to Sydney to be involved in the opening ceremony and the subsequent Olympic Games of 2000, where I was a sprints relay coach there and had a couple of athletes on the team. It's almost a dream like when I look back on that, and the fact that it's 20 years ago is frightening. But so I think not having had exposure to the AFL, I went into it with my eyes wide open to potential of what we could do, and I was blessed to have someone like Kevin Sheedy who thinks very laterally. A lot of people have said to me, you guys think laterally. I used to think I'd go one way, Sheeds would go the other, and we'd meet around the back. It was terrific, and he just empowered me as a young high-performance coach to put these ideas in place. And I can still remember James Hird, who was a Brownlow medalist and a superstar of the game, and still to this day, the name Hird is one held in high regard in the AFL. And James Hird, being the captain of the Essendon Football Club, had broken down with a running injury, a navicular stress fracture, twice. And when I got there, I was almost relieved that he had this injury, because it was a running injury and I'd be able to have a role in getting him back. So he did all the things I told him to do, and by the end of the season, things were looking good. He got onto the ground to play, and again, playing Carlton, cracked the bone. And for the third time, at that time, this is back at 99, early 99, you never came back from a navicular stress fracture, 3 times running. But in the recesses of my mind, I remembered being in Germany and met a guy there called Muller Wolfhard, and they had this revolutionary new drug that they were using in Germany. And I arranged to go there, got Therapeutics Goods Act approval, brought it back into Australia, and they operated on James Hird's foot and put that osteoprotein 1, it was called, into his navicular, and he never had a sore bone from that day forward in his foot, and of course captained the team the next year. And look, I probably got a lot of the credit for the rehab for that one, but the reality was it was a very new form of treatment that the Germans had, and if I hadn't been from my background in track and field, well, maybe James Hird wouldn't have made it back into AFL, but that's the way it goes. And so those sort of things, bringing different things into the AFL became very naturally for me.
Mm-hmm. And is that treatment still around, or is that?
Yes, yes. Okay. No, that's for recurrent bone injuries. That's a pretty common treatment now.
Yeah.
It's an old hat. But look, the other things I would think that I've been able to influence in the AFL. I'm not saying people didn't do it before, but when I got to Essendon, I introduced them to hot cold tubs. And they were getting in and out of hot and cold with a great deal of complaint, but they did it because that was the nature of the game. And they were at a point where they were redeveloping the setup at Windy Hill, and they allowed me to put in these big commercial hot cold tubs. And so the Bombers were doing that. And it was also at a time when what's now called Marvel Stadium was being built, and the Bombers were the anchor tenants. So I was again able to influence that and get hot cold recovery tubs put into the facility, professionally done. And they're still there to this day. And of course that exposed all the other teams to this form of treatment. And if you go around the world now, I think Australians are still regarded as the pioneers in that area. I certainly didn't come up with the concept. I found it when I was in my travels around the world, but it's certainly become a very, very common thing now to see in the AFL of hot, cold, and even cold recovery for players. And I'm quite proud of the fact that I was able to influence that in my time in the AFL.
Yeah, look, I was going to talk about it further on, but I'm going to talk about that now as far as the recovery modalities go in the current time, because there's a lot of discussion about it, what works, what doesn't. Maybe some new research coming out saying that what we thought was good isn't. Such as ice, such as heat, compression garments, foam rollers, getting massages and all that. So obviously, the cold hot is sort of like a flushing, isn't it? It's sort of
It's more if you're sore after you've, like say, if players played a game or you've been on a long run, or you might have done a high intensity interval session. That it can be good for that. So you get in the hot and then cold, probably 30 seconds on each. Up to a minute, and then you'd finish on the cold. And what that does is it dilates the vessel, and then it restricts, and so that forces waste product through. So the theory being that'll get those waste products out of the system sooner. There's also, if you're in cold, there is an anti-inflammatory effect on that. If that is the issue, if you've got micro tears, then that is going to assist in that type of thing. But like you said there, it is a constantly evolving thing, and I think it's also a personal thing. And I'm really fortunate now, the squad I've got. I almost feel like I'm the head of the United Nations at the moment. I've got athletes from all parts of the world in my squad here in Sydney, and what's reinforcing more and more to me is different people respond to recovery differently.
Yep.
So you can't say, oh, hot coals are a load of crap, I tried it and it was hopeless. Well, maybe that's correct for you, but for the next person, it is absolutely fantastic. And on it goes. So when you talk about, compression garments, foam rollers, dry needling, acupuncture, stretching, whatever it might be, I think you should try those things. And what I developed for my athletes here, and anyone listening, I'm more than happy if you want to email me, I'll send it to you. I put together a thing called Pick a Box Recovery, and I challenge them to get 150 points a week, and they have to choose different forms of recovery to get that in the course of a given week. And by doing that, then the athlete's able to work out what works better for them than other forms. And another side of that too, while we're talking about it, I've just come from doing some speed agility with an up-and-coming tennis player. And he was talking about, I asked him what he was going to do for his recovery. And he said that he was going to go home and try a salt bath. And I'd been talking to him about Epsom salts being a good form of a relaxant for some people. So he's going to put a packet of Epsom salts in a hot bath and just soak the afternoon away, which is probably a fantastic form of recovery. And I'd recommend that to people. But if he was going to go to a competition, say in January, and he's got to perform tennis on the Saturday afternoon and then back up for the semi-final on the Sunday morning, I wouldn't recommend that he go soaking up into the atmosphere in an Epsom salt bath. I'd be doing hot coals so that it almost invigorates his body for the next day. Sure. So, again, you would try that. You'd try and work out, well, what's best for me and what's going to benefit me to get the best result. And you certainly wouldn't leave it until, the time of the major competition to do it. You do it now. Make it a part of your overall program. It's not something you add on. It's integral to your program. Recovery should be integral to what you're doing to enable you to perform at your best the next session. There's a Greek philosopher around a few years ago now. His name was Hesiod. He said that if you do a little upon a little upon a little, it becomes a lot. And I take that philosophy into my training. If you just do the little things consistently well over time, it becomes a very significant advantage that you have that those who cut corners didn't.
No, I like that message. I like, and I remember asking a physio about putting ice on something not long ago, and he said, "Does it work? Do you get a response from it?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Well, do it." And if I had said no, he would have said, "Well, don't do it." And pretty much what you're saying there, if it works, that's the most important thing, And also from a mental point of view, if like just say going into a race and you have this ritual you do a couple of days leading into it, and you do all these, foam rolling, whatever it might be, and if you feel it's making a difference, then that psychologically is also, a fantastic edge as well, even if it's, even if it may not be doing something. If you believe that it's doing something, then that's still an advantage.
Yeah, well, I personally, from a coaching point of view, I think the great advancements in performance are going to come from a greater understanding of neural training and how we get the neural system to recover faster. And I haven't noticed that with the hot coal stuff, that has a definite impact on the neural system. I'm not saying that's the only way, but it certainly is a way. Also things like dry needling that physios do use a lot. And it's nothing new. Go back a couple of thousand years and, the Chinese are doing acupuncture. I think that anything that can influence the neural system, that's where the future is going to be. And I also feel that nutrition, and particularly in and around gut health, is going to have a much bigger role to play over the next 20 years in the way that we prepare athletes, not only for training and competition, but also for the recovery aspect of things. Yeah. I think we're just starting to scratch the surface.
Yeah. I think you're right. I think sometimes we've been focusing on the wrong areas. I'm just halfway through a book now. As you know, they're calling the gut the second brain, and it's something we've overlooked. And I had a lot of problems with GI issues in racing, usually the really long stuff, and so I'm trying to work that out. So you're reading through a couple of books on GI and the gut and all the rest of it, and I do find it interesting.
And, well, mate, I got wiped out here several years ago now by an autoimmune disease, which I didn't see coming, and I believe it was brought on by extreme stress through a marriage breakdown. And mate, I lost 7 years of my life in terms of memory. What I had was a thing called limbic encephalitis, and it's where the immune system turned on my brain, and it was literally that my brain was on fire. I'd had multiple seizures, and I was left with lesions on my brain. And the immediate impact of that was memory, where as I said, I lost 7 years of memory. And it also affected my sense of smell and taste, a bit of vision in my eye. I became super emotional, whether that be, anger or crying, and I'd swing between each. I spent over a year in care, and look, I've been fortunate to come out the other side of that. But the point of telling you that was that I was, at one point, was on about 19 tablets a day to control the condition that I had. And the neurospecialist was telling myself and my family that I was going to be on that dosage for the rest of my life. And I just figured there's no way I was going to be doing that. And I've questioned nutrition a lot, and dietitians and nutritionists. I've questioned it a lot. And I figured that if I was going to get my brain health back, I needed to exercise my brain just like I would any other muscle in my body. And that was through making it retain things and forcing it to learn. So I enrolled myself in a postgrad nutrition course at Deakin University, and set about, pretty much my agenda was to learn about the anti-inflammatory properties of food. Now, I'm down the track a little bit on that, and I've come a long way. The most important part of that story is I'm down now from the 19 tablets a day to half a tablet a day, and I'm still pretty bullish about getting rid of that half a tablet. But for now, I'll go with half a tablet. But I believe a lot of that's been driven by my food selection and food choice, and then that links into that discussion we've just started on with the gut health and what our gut demands in terms of whether, sugary foods, refined foods, processed foods, and what that's actually doing to our overall health. I think that side of things, that's where I really was going with the advancements. It's in around that I think we're going to make big breakthroughs in terms of sport performance and recovery over the next 20 years. In that neural and gut health is where it's going.
Yeah, I hope so. And I think you might be right with that. And it's sort of it's a bit weird. It's sort of like going back to where we should have been decades ago. Like, we maybe we overlook the obvious sometimes. And as far as, there are people out there that are eating cleaner food and all the rest of it. But there are still, and I know myself, I'm still trying to, and I find that exact food that sometimes, you might eat something, you might get a little bit of a minor response. You don't think nothing of it, but try eliminating something and see if it makes a difference.
And you've got to go back to that old 6-week rule, I think, that you've got to give it time to work through the system and be part. You can't just say, I'm going to have this type of diet and try it for a week or two. Oh, no, that's too hard. I won't do that. It's got to become part of your whole thing. With my squad that I have an acronym that we use, and it's not a coincidence that it's CNN. So when I say CNN to you, I would imagine that you're thinking of the cable news network in the States. And quite often, CNN will pop up on your television screen. There's been a landslide in Venezuela or, another unfortunate incident somewhere else in the world, and CNN will have ticker tape across the bottom of the screen. When that's happening, I want to be in my athlete's head. The C stands for consistency. N, no compromise. N, no doubt. If you want to get results, you've got to train consistently well all of the time. If you want to get results, you cannot compromise your training. You can't say, I'm going to have a clean diet, but just this once I'm going to go out and try that. And no, we're going to have it's a boys' night. You're kidding yourself. And then N stands for no doubt that what you're doing is going to result in what you want it to do. So the acronym for my squad is CNN, and that applies for how they eat, how they train, how they recover, how they live their life.
Yep. And generally, when you hear or see what the elite and what the best in the world are doing, they are doing those things. You know what I mean? So,
you've got to be elite. You've got to be different to everybody else. You've got to do things differently to how other people do it, and to a higher level. And most people can't do that, and that's why they're not elite. They've got elite dreams, but not elite action. And a lot of people. Again, I say to my athletes, you've got to learn to dream with your eyes open. So many people are dreaming with their eyes shut. That's because they're asleep. Open your eyes and get on with it. But if you're fair income, you can do this. It's just about making the right choices and consistently, not compromising, no doubt, go for it.
Yep. Mate, if I walked into your clinic tomorrow, what's going to happen? Like, I just want to go back to what you're actually doing there for the runners that are listening. Obviously, you're looking at gait patterns and all the rest of that. So are there any? I mean, generally, I love watching people run. I'm working outdoors and I'm seeing people running. I'm in an area where people are constantly running past me, so I can't help but look at people running past, and I can see generally a lot of familiar movement patterns that are so wrong, whether they know it or not. So you must see some obvious ones there. But if I was to ask you, what are the biggest ones that you know you're going to see practically before you actually even put them on the treadmill?
No, it's a good question. And can I say that I don't analyse their running on a treadmill? Treadmills are fantastic if you're on a cruise ship and you've got no other choice. Other than that, go past the treadmill and get out in the real world and run. That's where the real mechanics come. The ground doesn't move underneath you. If you are going to run on a treadmill, or you're in a sporting professional organisation, then you go for something like a woodway treadmill, which is a curve like a jelly bean shape. So that then imitates the natural mechanics of movement. But otherwise, I think analysing running gait on a treadmill is a nonsense. It's one of ignorance. And so I'll get the people out and I'll video them from side on, from behind and in front. And I think it's important that you can communicate that back to that individual so they can see it, and then they've got some buy-in and talk about what we're going to do to change that. So to answer your question, what are the most common things you see? Well, what I'm seeing a lot of is that people have got their posture. So if you think of the upper back where you're sort of hunched over, and now a lot of people are at computer screens all day. This is my theory. They're at computer screens all day, or they're on their phones texting. Next time you're on the bus or the train, have a look around at what people are doing. Most of them are hunched over their phone, texting, and look at their posture of their back. And so most people are quite weak in their upper back and quite tight in their chest. So you've got to strengthen what you stretch and stretch what you strengthen. So in this case, strengthen the upper back. It opens up your chest for the longer distance runners too. It'll give you greater volume of air capacity coming in potentially. And so it gets you into a better position. But mechanically for running, it allows a freer range of running from your arms. If you have got inwardly rotating shoulders, so they're like coming in towards you, then your arms are likely going to swing across your body. So if your arm's swinging across the midline of your body, that's going to force you to rotate when you run. So your upper body's going to rotate. It will also make the lower, for every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. So if your right arm swinging across your body, you can bet your bottom dollar that the left arm is also swinging towards the midline of the body, or it's got an excessive recovery range. So to fix those things, strengthen the upper back, to pull the arms back, to stop the shoulders internally rotating so that it's straighter. Just go for the big rocks by looking at that one. The other area that's probably 7 out of 10 people that I see, it's what we call the posterior chain. People are weak in their low back, they're weak in their glutes, they're weak in their hamstrings. And those areas, you can strengthen them with exercises like bridging, or use a Swiss ball and do a Swiss ball leg curl. Look, there's a host of different things you can do. Strengthen up your low back, stabilise it. People have got sore backs and they're saying, oh, no, it's genetic. My father had a sore back, so, it's probably always destined to... Please. It's, you might have some sort of predisposition to it, but, you can change that if you get strength balance there in the low back, glutes and hamstring. We've also, in my experience, got overactive. The glutes are made up of 3 muscles, gluteus maximus, medius and minimus. And max does all the work. It's like the bully of the triad. It's the other 2 that need to do the work, particularly if you're a runner. You need to get minimus and medius working, and they're just fine, controlled movements in there. You talked earlier about, some of the changes that I brought into AFL, and one of the things that I'm quite sure that I brought into AFL back in the very late 90s, early 2000s, was Pilates. I can still remember going to Kevin Sheedy with the sheets, and he looked at the sheets. He said, what the hell is this Pilates? And Pilates is now a common part of the strength program for footballers and for athletes. And I think that it's important that you get a clinical Pilates instructor. So clinical Pilates is a physio trained in Pilates, And it's actually started as a strengthening program for dancers a number of years ago. It's certainly, again, nothing new, but it gives you that controlled movement, especially through the core and especially through that glute area. So, if people are having issues there, then I would say do your strength session, do it 3 times a week, and make one of those a Pilates type session. The other area that I see a lot of issues are going to be knee, the inside of the knee usually, and shins, where people are getting issues through there. And that was invariably going to come about through joint stability in a lot of cases, particularly, again, through the hip, but also it may be from the ankle. So I work a lot around that. At the end of a training session with the squad of athletes that I train, if people ever come to watch my training sessions, you'll notice that at the end of the session, I'll get my athletes to take their shoes off and they'll go for a couple of laps walk as part of their warm down in bare feet. The reason why we do that, I want to strengthen and stretch their feet, particularly around the plantar fascia at the bottom of the foot, and make sure that their feet are mobile. And I also like to run them in sand for that very reason also, to give them the ability to actually use their feet and strengthen up their feet. It's such a vital part of running, yet we're almost in shoes that are over-engineered and stop the feet from doing what they're actually designed to do. So strengthen up your feet. And you can do exercise, even rolling up a towel with your toes, silly as that sounds, can strengthen up your feet. So I get my athletes to do that sort of stuff as well.
Okay. Let's sort of narrow in a little bit more on that. So in the gym, actually there's a couple of ways I want to go here. One is strengthening your glute with say barbell squats and doing some good pistol squats if you have those capabilities and range of motion. But just say you go into the gym and you're certainly building strength into your glute. Doesn't necessarily transfer over into being stronger as a runner if you're not using that glute. So that's sometimes where that transaction can get lost. And I when I'm doing my research for this interview, I heard you discuss that, and I thought that was great. So I want to touch on that as well. I think you said something along the lines of it's in AFL, people are so focused on how much they're squatting and how much they're pressing, but if that doesn't sort of carry over to increased performance on the field, then what's the use? So let's talk about that one.
Yeah, there's a bit of a diminishing returns, isn't there? I think, it's easy to get carried away with how much you can squat, but if it's not functional movement that you're doing, for me, the squat's almost like turning the muscle on to what, to its maximum excitability. But then what do you want it to do? So I will often do, we call them supersets, and so they'll do a squat, but then what's the function? Well, for a runner, I think you should be looking at doing things like step-ups. So they don't have to be weighted. It could be quite an explosive dynamic step-up. It could be lunges. It could even be bounding, box jumps, something that's functional and dynamic movement, utilising the glutes and hamstrings for that. Then go back to the squat and do the number of reps that you're being prescribed for that. Then come back again and do your box jumps or your bounding or hopping. Going back again when I was with the Bombers, one of the first things I did with that redesign of the gym was we put in Olympic lifting platforms so that they could do explosive dynamic lifts. But I also put in a synthetic athletics track, and a lot of people thought that, that was just because I was trying to hang on to my pass as a track coach. But I wanted them to be able to do the squat or clean or whatever it was they were doing, then go up onto the track and do an explosive expression of movement using the muscles that you've just excited or just turned on. And so, I'm very much into that. Even for a rehab program, look at the essence of movement, the muscles you want to use, be that a squat, and then look at how you're going to express that in a movement. And as people become better at the lifting that they're doing, then I would get them to do more complex lift, like a power clean or a split snatch or whatever that might be. But I don't think you've got to do that. Even in the most basic programs or the most advanced programs, I believe that you should start your warm-up by activating and switching on, for want of a better term. Sometimes I hate that term, but getting those muscles ready for what you're going to do. And that might be doing some lying on your side and doing some lateral flutters to get the glutes working, using a TheraBand above your knees and doing crab walks and around your ankles for that matter. Doing all sorts of movement using TheraBand. TheraBand is a marvellous little tool. I think a lot of people probably discovered TheraBand with COVID-19 because they can't get to the gym. But it's a great tool, and I think you can do activation work before you get into your session proper.
Yep, definitely for sure. And runners know that. They're just not doing it, guys. So get that little mini band set. I order them off eBay. They turn up at the door for about $15. You get 6 different resistance bands, so they're so cheap.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of implementing and doing it. And we all know we need to do it. And I tell you what, it makes a difference. Generally, I do a bit of a warm up and then do that. Let's use that word activation with the mini bands, and then do some run throughs. And when you actually do your efforts, it's amazing the difference it makes, because it's like it's ready to go. It's sort of like you have turned it on. The word activated is good because it's sort of ready to go, and so that means you're going to get more quality out of your session. And I just believe, because it's your body's not going to compensate for those first couple of reps, because it wasn't ready for that load. But if you've sort of like tapped it on the shoulder and said, okay guys, this is what's coming up, by activating it, it just makes a hell of a lot more sense to do that.
Well, that's right, and it allows you to strengthen in a certain range, which is also an important thing. Like when I'm talking about this strength to you, or any of the programs that I put together for whoever, I like it to be functional. So what's the functional outcome that I want from this program? And, when you look at the human body, we're talking about physiology of a male body, it's around 60% of the male body's water. Female, even a little bit more than that. So if more than 60% of us is water, then, I use an analogy with my athletes of it's like a stream. The stream follows the path of least resistance. And if there's a great big rock there, the stream will go around it and keep going, and it'll just carve out a path of least resistance. Our bodies do exactly the same thing when we move. And if your boulder, your rock in the stream, is a tight low back, well, then you're going to change the movement pattern that you have to compensate for that boulder that's there. Rather than move the boulder, just go around it. Your body is 60% water. It'll go the path of least resistance. You've got to get in there and functionally redesign the pathways within your body. And I believe you do that with the strengthening. So switching the muscle on again with an exercise, let's use the analogy of the squat again, and then do the movement pattern that you want, whether it be that running or a drill or an explosive movement in the manner that you want it to be done. I just think for the bodies that I'm coaching, don't take no for an answer. I've got a vision of what I want that body to move like, how I want that body to move down the track with efficiency. Then I've got to make sure that I keep tending the pathways that are there and get the pathways with the least amount of resistance possible.
Yep. And certainly sprinting would keep you honest, because there's no room for failure there. It's basically biomechanics and movement, at its best, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I call sprinting, it's the most simple, complex skill that there is. I mean, everybody can run. If you go down to the shopping centre later, you'll see some 2-year-old trying to out-sprint their mother, giggling with delight as they get away. And, they're running, they just go for it. Anyone can run. But it becomes complex when you've got to do that with a certain execution, timing, and replicate it precisely over and over and over and over again. That's the complexity of sprinting at the highest level. So take the most simple skill and make it complex, but more importantly, take a simple skill and make it the complex perfect. Yeah. And to do that, it's got to embrace everything, whether that be the training loads that you're doing, the strength loads that you're doing, the recovery loads, the repeatability of what you're doing. It all becomes one. And if you're going to embrace it to its full, then I think you've got to tick all of those boxes.
Yep. Now I'm just thinking, let's just use this as an example. I'm in the gym, I'm doing jump squats with like a weighted bag over my shoulders, like those mini punching bags. Yep. So 15 kilo weighted bag over my shoulders and doing jump squats. Now, do I go for 3 sets of 15? Right. Now 15 is extremely fatiguing, struggling to get through it, or do I just go to fatigue? The reason I ask that is because sometimes I think, the numbers are good because it gives us structure to go on. And I'm just actually thinking when I'm doing this, you get to 12 and you can hardly get your feet off the ground to finish off that set. When do you say that I've got the training benefit and stimulus I'm after and trying to do more is of no benefit? Or is there benefit to completely exhaust that muscle to fatigue?
Yeah, well, I think it depends so much upon what it is that you're actually training for and why would you do that? At what point are you going to have to be able to do replicated jumps in a state of fatigue. And you might say, well, if I've got to be in soccer and I might have to head the ball after being out there for 90 minutes and the ball's coming in and I've got to be able to jump again, a repeated jump after multiple, then you could probably mount a case for that. I still wouldn't accept it, to be honest. And I think that if you were doing 15 jumps, say, repeated jumps on there, as you're getting towards probably after 8, you're starting to do them with poor form and it's slowing down. So you're starting to jump as fast as you can, as slowly as possible. And straight away, that doesn't make sense. So I think you're better to do it to its highest level and then and try to then get that so it's repeatable. Once you've got that, then you start to put it in so you do get your volume by spreading it out through the training stimulus. But I think I'd be very open to someone coming up with a challenge for that, given the circumstance that they're on. You might be in a workplace and you've got to do particular activities that you've got to do that to a state of fatigue. Firefighting springs to mind, for example. So there may be an example where you may have to put that in, but I think that you prescribe that for what the individual needs. I'll get an athlete to come in and, as well as the postural and the movement analysis, we'll also start looking at what is it that you need to succeed, or ask them, who do you most admire in the sport or the event that you're doing? And they'll rattle off a couple of 2 or 3 people, and then ask them, what is it that person's got you don't have? And that will divulge to you the area of weakness that person needs to work on. Now, if that happens to be repeated endurance activity that's explosive, well then, by all means, go for your 15-rep sand jump. But whatever it might be, I think you'll be able to find what it is that you need to do.
Yeah, I was just thinking more the benefits of, obviously, like you say, you get to number 8, a lot of lactic acid going on there, heart rate's up through the roof, and then it just becomes a mental thing. I'm just thinking from a physiological point of view, from actual training effect point of view, obviously, loading up all the tendons and all the rest of it, that plyometric, it's quite a solid exercise. So I understand what you're saying, but, as far as, say, distance running goes, and you actually have to be out, I mean, it's obviously not exactly specific to running, but it's still, running is a series of jumps for multiple times, isn't it? We are jumping.
Well, they're getting that when they run. I mean, you've got, up to 10 times your body weight going through your joints when you're running. I mean, it's quite a massive lot of force going through there. But going back on your example, rather than do 15 reps on there, I'd probably do something like 6 or 8 with a sandbag, and then do a number of jumps without the sandbag. So it's more, you might have a reduced resistance. So you might go back to your TheraBand again and do it with a lesser resistance, and then do the last set with no resistance, so that you're upping the ante each time you go, and you're going to have a greater recruitment demand because of that initial load that you put in there. That would be my approach to that. But, I make no apology for the fact that my background comes from explosive movement. I'm a sprints coach, but I've worked in the endurance area of athletes, and really it's the mechanics shouldn't change a great deal when you're talking about efficiency. It's just in sprinting, it's just more pronounced, that's all. They're just bigger engines, they just don't go for as long.
Yeah, for sure. And rest periods, is that important to get right, or it's as long as you're in the ballpark?
No, I think it's vital to get it right. And I think it also changes for each individual again. And rest periods, if you're working with a large group, logic tells you that you're going to have a recovery period of time, depending on what it is that you've done. If you're doing intervals on the track, for example, and you want to get a maximum recovery, and so to keep the quality in the session, you're probably going to have a 6-minute recovery, again, depending on the distance and the speed that you've done. But I would also be using heart rate. And, if you sort of go on the old 220 beats minus your age and work in there, I'd normally have a recovery heart rate around about that 120 to 130 before they go again. So it's an incomplete recovery that you're doing. But it's such an area where I think you've got to dig down into, what are we talking about here? We're talking about a sprinter, a 1,500-metre runner, or a marathon runner, because all of those sort of things are going to change in and around your application of that. One of the big things that's been happening over the last 10 years is high-intensity intermittent training, where you're changing not only the recovery length, but also the type of exercise that follows it. So you're keeping the body constantly adapting. I mean, there was a period of time where we went through doing the same type of exercise with the same level of recovery after each one and adapted the athlete that way. And the only reason we got a change was we'd take the volume out, so therefore the intensity would go up. Well, now we're mixing volumes and intensity up, and I believe that we're getting better results and probably lower injuries from observation from doing just that.
Yep. For runners, when they're doing their strength and conditioning program, if they're looking at on just say a calendar year, should they be always doing just your normal, weighted barbell press and Romanian deadlifts or whatever it might be, as well as their sort of plyometric type work with the mini bands and TheraBands, like sort of always be doing them both? Or is there a certain time of year where you should just be focusing on just building that muscular strength into the muscles and the tendons as well as, or how do you sort of go about that?
Yeah, well, there was an old adage years ago. Again, it's just a bit of a fun to hang your hat on, I suppose. But you wouldn't do plyometrics until you could squat 1.5 times your body weight. So that pretty much automatically ruled out every kid in the country because they were too young to be doing that. Yet if you went to the school playground, they'd be doing skipping. So they're doing plyometrics in the playground. So there goes that theory. But plyometrics, as you're suggesting, in terms of you're bounding and hopping and single leg hops and box jumps and depth jumps, that type of thing. I think you've got to be technically so sound and you do need a fairly good strength base underneath you. The surfaces have to be so good. Your footwear has to be so good. For me, it was always fraught with danger, and it would be one thing that I'd try to bring into my programs as my athletes were peaking towards that latter part. And I used to sometimes hold my breath because you spend all of this time getting your athlete ready for the big occasion and only to get injuries and niggles and things from this sudden leap in intensity at the end. So as a consequence now, I incorporate my plyometrics into the program from the very beginning. So when they're doing, say, their 8 to 10 squats in the gym in a preparatory phase, I would still do box jumps or even bounding in that early stage of the program. And then what I manipulate is the intensity of the sessions by taking volume out and increasing the speed of execution or the rate at which they're contacting the ground or whatever it might be. So I'm mixing it up an awful lot rather than having a set this and a set that. But also the variety that you're having in there and the type of strength that you're having in there, particularly for the distance community. They've been doing hills for years, and the type of hill reps that you're doing, that's a different type of strength. So a steep hill is more to do with strength endurance. If you've got a lower gradient hill, say less than 6 degrees, over 60 to 80 metres, then that's going to be speed endurance type training for a distance run or even a quarter miler in sprinting. So that's a strength session in itself. Earlier I talked about incorporating other modalities such as Pilates. So strength can be not just in the gym. And, I think a lot of people get carried away with how much they can squat. Yet I ask them, how much can you actually do? Can you do with 3 chin-ups? And they can't do a chin-up. Yet when you're running, your mechanics are driven by your arm action. That'll determine your leg drive. So if you've got no upper body strength and balance, how are you going to go? So I'd be incorporating body weights in there as well as doing weights. So I think it comes down to what you've got access to, your level of development that you're at, and the facilities you've got, and the expertise of the people that are in the gym looking at you and working with you. It was interesting before when you mentioned about the squat. Very rarely do I give my athletes squats where they're putting a bar on their back because of the compressive forces of the bar on their back. You mentioned putting a sandbag on it, and I'm immediately more comfortable with that type of aspect. Then you start introducing things like, repeated jumps and the compressive forces on the spine. I get a little bit windy. Again, going back to what we talked about, I think the future of training is in the neural aspect of training. So when you're starting to compress the neural pathways on the spine, I get a little bit worried about that for my explosive dynamic sprinters.
Yep, okay. Now you touched on the stability thing, and obviously as runners we're in mid-air, then we come down on one leg. So there's obviously we need a lot of strength there. but we need a lot of stability. And you mentioned there like the glute medius, which is obviously a pretty big major component for hip stabilisation there. So like you said, very important for runners to do, like with those crab walks with the bands and that. So would you recommend, like, for runners, rather than doing, say, a single squat, one leg squat, do it possibly like on a Bosu ball or a wobble board or a wobble cushion or something to bring that instability in? Or do you feel it's not necessarily so important?
No, I actually think they're two different exercises. One's just for balance, and in many respects, it's pretty much good if you're in a circus act. As balancing on a Bosu ball and a Swiss ball on one leg. I mean, I think that's going to the absolute extreme in terms of running, and it's not the same dynamics. I think they'd be better doing proprioception work. So proprioception is knowing where you are in time and space. So doing a single leg hop and then balancing on that one foot would be better than just trying to balance on a P and saying, "Oh, look at me." But I also think you've got to put your foundation strength in place. So do your strength work in the gym, whether that be a goblet squat, holding a weight in front of you so you're not compressing your spine, or doing leg press, and then doing stability work, proprioception work, factoring all of that in. I just think strength work has to be holistic. It's not necessarily something extra that you're doing in there. It's built into your program proper, and all the movement stuff should be built into the strength program. And I'm even more, I feel even more strongly about that when we're talking about distance runners, because I think that it's that getting that functional strength base there and then basically showing the body how to express that movement, and that can be helped with stability exercises and with better stability in the ankle and so on. So yes, I'd be incorporating that. And sorry, just on that, the other thing that I've got my guys doing a lot of and have done for many years, and any people that might be listening to this that I used to work with at Essendon Footy Club, they'll be having probably a nightmare recall when I start talking about medicine ball training. Again, nothing new. It's been around for 100 years. But using medicine ball for functional strength expression is a very effective way for getting better movement patterns in your athletes. But you should still have your underlying strength balance and making sure that your body is in balance. We talked before about posture. Just take a photo of yourself or your athlete you're just in their shorts and look at the structure of the back and look if the shoulder sits up a little bit higher on one side. See if you can pick the side that's a dominant side. Well, if you're an elite athlete, I don't believe you should have a dominant side like that. And you can get that strength back. Don't worry about being in the gym, worrying about how much that you can bench press. Get in there and do a unilateral bench press where you've got a dumbbell in each hand and you're going for the balance in there. Once you've got that strength levels there, then bring in your bench press and do that. If you want to bring in a multifactorial way of expressing that, then put them on a Swiss ball and do a unilateral bench press on there, whilst you're also going to be working that posterior chain that we talked about before, low back, glutes and hamstrings. They're going to be singing an ensemble for you down there, trying to keep your balance on the Swiss ball. Your core's going to be, your abs are going to be fired up for you, whilst you're working through getting balance in your upper body, just as you would when you're running. Again, get yourself into that base of strength, and then look at the manner in which you can make this as functional as possible. And then once you've got that in place, then go for your run and look at your times drop.
Yep, for sure. Now, why do you think, I mean, would you agree that as far as distance running goes, strength and conditioning and runners getting in the gym is pretty poor, and it always has been? Whereas other sports, it's been part of the program. Why do you think?
But I think for running, it's a little bit different. I think a lot of it's been born out of ignorance, and I think part of it comes from the strength and conditioning community, where that's been their niche area, where they're working with that. And the easiest way to gauge whether you're any good at that is to have muscle built on muscle. And the pictures of the guys with their shirts off and and pecs to die for and abs that you could grate cheese on. That's sort of been the whole thing. But it's the strength that you don't see that's important. And for endurance runners particularly, it's not about being built like Adonis. It's about having the functional control that Adonis would envy. And they still need to get that strength stuff in there. But the distance community, I feel, shy away from that for two reasons. One, they're intimidated by that environment because of the meatheads that are in there quite half the time. And also, the basic premise of elite distance running is a thing called VO2 max, your ability to utilise oxygen. And part of that relates to your weight. A distance runner does not want to put on a great deal of muscle mass. And if they do that, then their efficiency levels can be thrown out. So they go into the gym, and they're not done properly. It's structured up by someone who's judging the effectiveness of it by how much muscle they put on, rather than how much body balance have I been able to bring about. And when their muscle mass goes up, their VO2 comes down. So they're the best looking physical loser on the track. They give the strength stuff away, just when what they needed to do was now refine that and get your focus should be on strength, not muscle growth. And that all comes down to the type of lifting that you're going to be doing. And if you're going to go into your reps of, say, 15 reps and above, you're not going to put on much muscle or what we call hypertrophy in there. But if you're going to drop down to 12, 10, 8, and maybe even into the realm of 6 repetitions, then you probably are going to be putting on a lot of muscle mass. And if you're going to go down low and have such excessive weight that the movement expression of that is going to be so slow, I think it defeats the purpose for a distance runner myself.
Yep, okay. Now, you're just going to start a new role as a coaching advisory role over there at Athletics Australia. So what are you trying to bring to the table over there?
Well, I hope what I'm going to bring to the table is what they want to be put on the table. I think we've got to take the opportunity to step back here in this country and say, where are we going in terms of our coaches and coach education for our athletes? And when I look at the number of coaches that have been coming through, like the coaching accreditation system of Australian Track and Field Coaches Association, ATFCA, it's pretty much been sidelined. And Athletics Australia have moved in there and putting in their own structures of coach education. It is a fantastic time. It's the best opportunity we've had for many years in this country to identify what needs to be educated to potential coaches. So we've got a philosophy for coaching across the country, that this is what we should be doing with our young kids as we come through, and this is what we should be doing with our teenagers to keep them in there. We should be trying to make our athletes athletic. Don't worry about whether they're a 200-metre runner or a 800-metre runner or a shot putter. When they're 10, let them be kids and let them be athletes and teach them how to move. I want to be able to bring that to this coach advisory board so we can get a philosophy in this country that every part of the country sings from the same philosophy and we work in the same direction. Now, whether that's possible or just a fanciful dream, well, I'm prepared to give it a crack. And I'm quite excited and honoured to be asked to be on the, it's an 8-member coach advisory board, and it's a dynamic group of coaches from across the country. And I just feel now's a great opportunity to bring about some change and let's hope that we take athletics in this country to the next level.
Yep. So that's back to the sort of little A's and even the way kids are moving in schools are mainly just through the Athletics Australia foundations and Little Athletics.
Absolutely.
Yep.
I mean, come with me to a school sometime. I spend time every week. I'm working and consulting as a mentor at the Scots College here in Sydney. It's a fabulous school. And one of the things I can't help but observe is at lunchtime, when kids should be out on the playground running around and, playing bull rush or whatever it is they should be playing, they're sitting down with their computer and playing some faceless game with someone and, clicking buttons on a keyboard. Further changing their posture or enhancing that hunched over posture that we talked about before. We've got to get our kids moving, and part of it's got to start with education of what is it that we're trying to achieve. And if we can contribute with that with the Athletics Australia Coach Advisory Board, that'd be great. But I do think that we need to attract more coaches into the sport. We've got to have a more collaborative approach. I think this coach is working in isolation and trying to be the saviour of their thing and going off and working as an accountant by day and then coming out and being an elite coach by night. That's fantastic because that's a community aspect of the sport. but they should have the support of that event group so that everybody's collaborating and collecting ideas together and bringing that through. You're still going to have your own little imprimatur, your own little stamp of individuality on the program that you've got there, but you stop trying to create something that has been in the process now for over 100 years. Let's do it together. And I think that if we do that together, we'll see the standard of Australian sport lift. Now, not everybody's going to want that, because I think a lot of people in the coaching game are in it for the wrong reasons. They're talking about my athlete and what I do and what we're going to achieve. That's ego talking. It's about the athlete. How can you get the athlete to improve? And I think we've got to do that as a group. And that's what I'm hoping that this collaborative board with Athletics Australia will be part of the process of doing just that.
So this collaborative board, it's a new thing that they're introducing, is it?
Yes, it is.
Okay, yep.
And the first meeting of that is next week. And so, look, one of the people that was the driver behind that was Christian Malcolm, and unfortunately this week he's announced his resignation. He's heading back to the UK, so I hope it doesn't fall over before it begins, but I'm a lot more optimistic than that, and I think the sport is bigger than certainly bigger than John Quinn, and certainly bigger than Christian Malcolm. And if we can get in this together, I think we can affect the positive change that I was alluding to before.
Yeah. No, fantastic. Yeah, all the best with that, mate. Let's move on to hydration. Now I know you've done a bit of research into this. Now, we're always told, and as a runner and athlete when I was younger, that the old cramps were low electrolytes and main focus on the sodium there, and you're low in salt and all the rest of it. And there's a lot of new evidence coming out now that it's got more to do with sort of muscle cramping, with evidence sort of pointing more towards that neuromuscular control that's triggered by that muscular fatigue. So it's more of that muscle fatigue rather than being low in electrolytes. What's your sort of input into that?
I wouldn't move totally away from the concept of electrolytes and diet and what people have had. So no, there's definitely a very significant role to have there. Your neuromuscular system is not going to function properly if it's not hydrated properly. And if you consider that, your body's made up of billions of cells, and through those cells flow the fluid. Let's just say the blood is flowing through there. If your body's desperate for an electrolyte or a carbohydrate or a protein molecule or whatever it might be, the cell will grab that and utilise that. If you're in a state of dehydration, not only does the cell itself actually shrink down significantly in size, it becomes less permeable, meaning that no matter how desperate it is, as that blood flows around the body, it can't get into the cell. So it might be desperate for that electrolyte, carbohydrate, protein, fats, or whatever. No matter how desperate it is, if it can't get into the cell, if the door is locked, then you're just going to wee that out or sweat that out and it's gone. So, no, the hydration is key to performance, in my opinion. It's also key to recovery. And I think it's so important for the athlete to become hydrated before they worry about what they're eating. That was why I educated the athletes and players I've worked with over the years to do just that. When I was at Essendon Football Club, I did my master's thesis on hydration, where we took a hydration sample of the players before every key training session and before every game of the season. Over 2 years I did that. And we looked at the data of how much a player weighed and what their urine-specific gravity was. So I took a urine sample out of them and looked at that, and then aligned that with their GPS data, how far they ran, how fast they ran, the injury rates they had, and their decision-making, how many errors that they had. There was a direct correlation to your level of dehydration and injuries and performance on the ground. Absolutely no doubt in my mind. And so the latest stuff that I've been involved with is I've just finished the supervision of 2 PhD students in the area of visual search, where we've put these glasses on that could measure the eye movement of an individual, and then if they're all over the place, the more that they're looking around, the less clarity there is in their decision making. So I believe that we're at a point now where we can identify the potential of a kid to make decisions. So they'll be an elite decision maker. I think you can see that at a young age, just like you can see a better runner or a better jumper or a better thrower at a young age. You can identify talent. I think we can identify decision makers as well. So the big curveball on that is the decision making influenced by your level of hydration? And I believe it is, because you get fluid build up in and around the eye. And the eye, that's the one thing that's driving all your decision making. So it's a fascinating area, this hydration. And it's one, people talk about, what supplements should I take and what should I be? Get the big blocks in place first. And the biggest block of all for me is hydration. Make sure that your hydration levels are there. How do you monitor it? If you're listening to this, monitor it by weighing yourself and monitor the fluid shift. If you go for a run and you've dropped 1 kilo on your run, you drink 1.5 litres to replace that, because you're going to have a thermogenic burn. So you're going to burn more once you've been on that run. So drink 1.5 litres to replace that kilo that you lost on the run. Make sure that you've got salts and electrolytes in your body, because that will help with the uptake into the cell. If you just drink water, that'll actually stimulate the kidneys. So you'll go to the toilet more often, and then you actually, ironically, become more dehydrated, plus you're weeing out salts and electrolytes that your body needs. So make sure that you're doing that. An interesting little side bit, I don't know if you're interested in this, but if you go to a fancy restaurant, they'll quite often put lemons in the water, and a lot of people think that's just a tradition. Well, it's a tradition that goes back over 3,000 years into the African countries, where they put lemon juice into the water to help the cells uptake and hold the water. It keeps you hydrated. So the acidity of the lemons actually help the cells hold the water. So that's the real reason. If you just drink water, you're probably going to stimulate yourself to go to the toilet more. Put a squeeze of lemon juice into that water, and suddenly you can hold on to it. People might think, well, why wouldn't you just have Powerade or Gatorade? That'd be fantastic. I think they're great drinks post or even during exercise. So if you're on a run or you're in a team sport, drink your Powerade during it and drink it after it. But having it before as your drink of choice and thinking that that's a healthy option, there's more sugar in those drinks than, a lot of the fizzy canned drinks that you can have. So that'll actually just give you a glycemic lift and crash and burn. And it's actually part of the issue of obesity in this country, but that's probably a talk for another day, too much intake of sugar. But, yeah, your most convenient and usable drink out there is water with a squeeze of lemon juice in it.
Yeah, no, definitely. And when I get on a discussion with some of my clients and I talk about increasing their water intake, and they say they hate the taste of water, they can't drink it, I often suggest that to squeeze some lemon in it. And also, first thing in the morning, it sort of kickstarts the system as well. So there's some other benefits to it besides just that flavour.
That's right. Well, and if you're reaching for a fizzy drink, well, maybe go for carbonated, mineral water. That's probably, that can give yourself the feel that you're after, the palate type of thing. But it's a fascinating area, and one that, again, I think, people are looking for, those big things that can make the change for them. It's the little things like hydration that's going to give you a good bang for buck.
Yeah, and again, it's sort of something I talk about is that people are always looking for those little secret 1%ers, the magic bullet, the silver bullet, and I always say, unless you're actually getting good sleep, you're recovering well in between the hard bouts, and you've got good nutrition and hydration, then you're wasting your time with all those things. Get all those things right, and then go looking for those extra 1%ers, and I'm sure you'll definitely agree with that one.
Oh, well, 110%. Yeah, get all, but people are worried about that top end, but it's the nutrition, it's the hydration, and it's that recovery stuff like sleep that are the big ones. I mean, the sleep one is a big issue for us now, I think more than ever, with the TVs that we have, like with the special resonance and stuff like that. It stimulates a part of your brain to think it's like daytime. Your laptop computer, your iPad, and of course your phone. And a lot of people, we're just in habits now, and the last thing we do is we may have a message before we go to bed, so let's just check just in case someone wants us. And so we'll check the phone, and what that does is stimulate a part of your brain. So it actually has been proven now beyond any doubt that this is interfering with our sleep cycles. And, you know, there's so much evidence around with the links between sleep and health, particularly with the immune function. And I talked to you before about my autoimmune, so I've looked very closely at the role of sleep. I think it's something that people should monitor as closely as they do their mileage. And there's so many different things out there now, different things that you can buy. A thing called Whoop, WHOOP, will be something you do. You can get watches from Garmin, I believe in the Apple Watch. I'm very much a fan of a ring that you can use called Oura, O-U-R-A, and you just pop that on your finger, and that will give you everything from your sleep patterns to your heart rate, your sweat rate, your temperature. It's quite a fascinating insight into your own sleep pattern. So if people are looking at that, I couldn't endorse that more, actually, to go and get into it.
Okay, yeah, no, it's interesting, that one. It's sort of a good segue into what I was going to talk about now with the data analysis. You know, it's sort of pretty big deal now in professional sport, including running, and runners always looking down at their Garmin watch to get all this feedback on all sorts of things, you know, oscillations and stride distance and cadence and heart rate and all these sorts of things. And, you know, I always sort of feel that the athletes are sort of moving away from that sort of inbuilt, more accurate sort of, let's call it a neurological or biological feedback system, you know, rather than actually how you're actually feeling and listening to your feet hitting the ground and thinking about your posture and all those more important things, worrying about looking at the data coming out of a watch. And like you said there, looking at your sleep, you can actually wear something that actually give you an indication of how well you're sleeping. Because, you know, if your head hits the pillow at 9 o'clock and you get up at 5 o'clock, so that's 8 hours, but you actually don't know how many hours you've actually been in that REM, that REM cycle, that deep sleep. So I say with that ring that you're talking about, that will give you an indication of how long you've actually had good quality sleep, rather than how many hours your eyelids have been closed.
Definitely, mate. And with, you know, it's obviously not validated. I was just looking at it. I'm a case study of one, but I'm just amazed at the accuracy of when I'm awake. You know, I might get a phone call or a disturbance or something like that, and my sleep patterns since the autoimmune disease haven't been that great. If I'm awake, it's recorded. I download it at the end every morning. It's incredible. It's down to the minute of when I know when I wake up if I had a good night, and it's always backed up by the data that I'm getting through from this. So it's a fascinating area, and I think it's one of those areas that if you can influence it, it's going to definitely help performance. I've got no doubt at all. Yeah. But yeah, going back on your point there, you know, running along and looking at your cadence rate and you know, all these different things that you're getting coming through, yeah, you can get overwhelmed. You've got to look at the data that's really important and get rid of all the rest. Just break it down to the key simple measures that you're looking for. Too much analysis leads to paralysis. Just get the key measurables that you're after and stick to those. But look, I've got no doubt that it's quite motivating and it's interesting, and if that's one of the reasons that gets you out there moving, well, go and do that. I'd rather have an athlete over analysing themselves with their Garmin watch than sitting down there playing Death Star on the PlayStation. You know, just get out there and move.
Yeah, like you mentioned before with the IPE, though, if they can just write down. I'm just thinking from my experience, it's funny that, you know, obviously you generally have a fatigue state most of the time, even if you're doing anything right, and that's just part of being a distance runner and running daily. But you get an idea of what's usual and what's unusual. And I always find that there'll be 2 or 3 days in a row where you just feel fatigued and you're sort of looking back at what you've done and you think, no, look, everything's fairly similar. I haven't suddenly increased load or intensity and I'm feeling really, really tired. And then on the 4th or 5th day, suddenly you come down, you know, with something, you know, sore throat or fever or a headache, and you think, you know, there were signals there that, you know, I felt that sort of rundown fatigue first before that came in, and that's obviously the immune system kicking in, trying to defeat the bad army before those symptoms come out. And they talk about heart rate variability and looking at all these other things, but if you were just doing you were recording your RPE in a diary, and suddenly you write down a number of 5, then a number of 4.5, and a number of 4, you could actually see that and go, okay, maybe before these, my immune system can't defeat the enemy and I get sick, I should back off for a couple of days. So that's actually responding to your normal impulses from your body, what it's trying to tell you. So that's sort of, where I think, like I said, people need to start listening more to their body rather than relying on other bits of information.
Definitely right. I think they've got to feel the event rather than record the event all the time. Don't always time your run. Just run for how it feels and the enjoyment factor of it. But also, I suppose, segment what we do. So we've got our running and we've got our work life and we've got our social life or whatever. It should all be one and the same. If you have a really stressful time at work, sometimes going for a run can actually make you feel better from that. But cumulatively, stress is stress, and your body's not differentiating too much all these different forms of stresses that you've got going on in your life. And, I'll tend to work on a 3+1, so 3 weeks up and 1 week down. If you start tracking and you see yourself going up, then you give yourself a recovery week, 3 weeks up, 1 week down, 3 weeks up, 1 week down. But you've got to really listen to your body. And if you're not running close to your PB or your goal time in that run, well, look at all the other factors that are going on in your body, whether that be, an argument with your partner or lack of sleep or, the arrival of a new baby in your life or stress about a new job, or you might be going to get the sack because of COVID. All of those things are going to manifest themselves in your performance. And you've got to listen to that and adjust your program according to that. Well, no Garmin watch, to my knowledge, is going to come out and tell you that you need to do this or do that. I think you've got to let your own body tell you that. The Garmin might be able to support it, but it's not going to tell you it. And I think people have to really listen to their body.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. It sounds like you watched one of my videos on the YouTube channel, and that was titled "Good Stress, Bad Stress, It's All Stress," and pretty much I talk about taking into account. A lot of runners will just look at their training diaries and how much, what sessions are done and how much run training they're doing, but overlook the other stresses in their life, like longer working hours, or you've just flown back from overseas, or relationship issues, all those things that you mentioned, and not realize that they actually may have to adjust that track session that we're going to do that afternoon if you had a sleepless night or you got a lot of stress going on, because they don't look at that as a stress and that as a possible problem that's going to inhibit their training. So
I really believe, and you've got to listen to those things, because it actually allows you to do the most fundamental thing for performance. I can go out there and tell my athletes what to do, so I can have a program, and the program's there and they can follow it to the letter. That's a training program, so I'm training them. But if I'm down there and I've got my program structured up and I'm seeing that they're doing particularly well, I might add an extra one. Or I might say, wow, you're going so well at this, let's change that. I'm going to give you this to do. Suddenly I'm coaching them. There's a big distinction between training someone and coaching someone. And if you're just a slave to the program, all you're doing is you're training. You've got to learn to coach yourself. And tools like these monitors and whatever, they make you slaves to that. But when you start listening to your body and how you feel and how you're responding to things, suddenly you're coaching yourself. And it's when you start coaching yourself that I believe performances go to the next level.
Yep, no, definitely agree, mate. Definitely agree. And I'm hoping that the more you talk about this and the listeners listening to this podcast, maybe they'll start to implement some of that. At least the more we talk about it, the more the message gets across there. Just because I said, a lot of runners just got the blinkers on and just keep focusing on how many Ks they can run in a week and not look at these other things. And we all know when a runner's injured, they're not the nicest people to be around, and then that creates even more of a problem. So,
mate, I still think there's a role for that. I mean, it can be motivating to get there and have those set targets. But, when you're making a goal set out for somebody, if I said that I was going to travel from Sydney to Melbourne on a road trip, well, the goal's pretty obvious. I'm going to get to Melbourne, so I want to get there. There's nothing in there that says that I can't stop off to have a look at the big sheep in Goulburn, or that I can't, pull over at Gundagai to just see, the dog on the tucker box. I can have I can deviate off that tour by just for what I need. Have my break when I need my break. My ultimate goal is still going to be there. And when I get to that goal, I want to be in the best shape possible. And if I have those little stop-offs along the way that allow me to stay alert and engage with the whole process, I believe I'm going to be better for it. I think you've got to apply that type of thinking to your training program. Don't be a slave to the program. Coach your program. Allow yourself to have stop-offs along the way. Allow yourself to stay engaged and refreshed. And when you get your end goal, you're going to reach it, possibly exceed your expectation.
Yeah. It's sort of like along the words of you really got to enjoy the journey to that destination. And a lot of athletes will say, the race day or competition day is the easy part because I've done all the work. It was the journey and getting there that was the challenging part and the most satisfying part. When I turn up to compete, I just go into mode and do what I hope to do and what I'm meant to do. But it's the journey along the way that's the most enjoyable part of the process.
Well, mate, I'm really hoping and I believe that I'm going to have a couple of athletes on the team for Tokyo when it gets underway next year. And when they're there and they perform to their best and people say, fantastic, wouldn't it be great to be an athlete like this? They didn't see the session today when they're on their hands and knees and all the hard work that they've done and the hard slog. It's the things that people don't see that probably make the difference. But, the end result is the easy one, the glory lap. But, gee, it's a long way to get into the stadium for that lap.
Yeah, no, for sure, and it's sort of again something I've spoken about over time. Is if you said to someone, okay, this is what you got to, I guarantee you'll win Olympic gold in 4 years. All right, I guarantee you that will happen. But what you have to do to get there is you got to do this every day, and just about no one will get to that Olympic gold because of the amount of hard work they actually have to put in and the discipline and putting things aside that they're not genuinely prepared to put aside. And that's what I love about sport, and that's what I love about champions is the fact that they just have that correct mindset and they can prioritise, and it's just a hard work. It's not always a smooth road. They have their ups and their downs, but that's what they deal with, and they accept it and they move on. And that's what I love about sport. It's just beautiful, those stories. And it's one thing we don't really get a lot about in running is hearing the stories behind all that. We watch the Olympics and we watch 20 guys run around the 10K final, whatever it might be, but we actually don't know the stories behind those people, and that's something that's missing, and I wish there was more of in sport in general, but certainly in running, because there's some brilliant stories out there that are untold and that we don't get to hear.
Oh, mate, that's the reason why I coach. It's the stories and being able to be a part of that fabric of those stories and allow people to achieve their ultimate goal for themselves. And a lot of people think that that's coaching the Olympic athlete. For me, I measure my coaching effectiveness on the improvement of my least talented athlete. I think you've got to look at it like that. It's not about reflected glory. It's about, are you impacting positively on this person's life? And if you are, that part of that's going to be about their performance out there, no doubt. But, a coaching role is such an important one for people. And, it's one I take pretty seriously, actually.
And do you try to get your athletes to, some people just want to be told what to do and they don't necessarily want to know why. Do you believe in educating them so they actually have an understanding of why they're doing something? Because that way they can make better decisions if for some reason they need to, because you're not there. And that.
Of course, and you're not going to be there, and maybe not there for the biggest moments. They've got to be there. I use the thing, I want to make myself redundant so they don't need me. So I'm trying to teach them about all these things we've been talking about today, but also even the concepts of periodization. But the best thing is when those athletes become coaches themselves, and we've got to secure the future for the sport. And that's by encouraging these people to know as much as they can. So at the end of the day, oh, my God, I'm so glad that that's finished and walk out of it. But they're still in love with the sport and they want to contribute to the sport. And they're then going to bring through the next charge coming through. It's just so important. And coaching just isn't this superficial thing. It's about coaching the person. I coach the athlete and then the event next. I think it's so important to do that. And if you can get him into the mindset of your athlete, then you're going to, not only are they going to go a longer way as an athlete, I think they're going to go a longer way as a person. Make them as good as they can be and bring them into, keep that whole system going, so we've got coaches into the future of high quality and standard and knowledge.
No, definitely, mate. Mate, I'm taking a lot of your Saturday evening, mate, so I'm going to bring this to a close soon. But I was just thinking, what, just for all the distance runners that are listening, what are some of the things that you reckon that they need to be doing that they're not? Like, what are some things that most of them aren't doing? And let's think about it, the most beneficial, the best bang for buck of things that they need to implement into their training. Basically, I guess minimising risk of injury is going to lead to high performance, because basically if you're not getting injured, the biggest thing that upsets someone improving as a runner is the downtime because they get injured. So straight away we know they need to be doing strength and conditioning, and especially as they get older. I'm just 48 now, and I know that I can train just as hard, but the amount of recovery I need is increased so much. But as far as training goes, what are some of the things they should be doing more of?
Personally, when we talk about distance running especially, I think that there's so little individuality in distance running. For an individual sport, I often laugh about that. It's such a confused term, because the distance runners all do the same type of work. They all run together. They run the same venues and the same hills, and everything's the same. And it's like one model fits all. I think look at the individuality. What does that individual need? Who is an athlete that's like that person? And how can we structure the program that meets the areas of that person, whether that be the strength program? And you'd look at that through their postural presentation, but I'd also look at their mechanics. How can we get the best technique? I was really blessed as a young coach when I first started. The absolute pin-up, the Usain Bolt of my day, was a guy called Carl Lewis. And technically, I don't think you could get a better exponent of running than Carl Lewis. And so that influenced my mindset of running. What's the vision that the athletes have of what they should look like and how they should be moving? And are they working towards developing that through a body that's balanced and in proportion, and is able to allow them then to execute the right technique with the most force? So I'd say get the individuality stuff going in there and have a needs analysis of what that is, and that's going to take you down the whole track of the posture and technique that we've spent a lot of time here. And the other thing is, when you talk about recovery, make sure you include into that things like mobility and joint movement, because as these athletes are doing more and more miles, they've got to make sure that they keep their body in tune. I mean, if you're going to drive your car over more miles, you've got to make sure that body, that car rather, is in tune and everything's fired up and ready to go. Mobility is important. We've talked about stability. We've talked about movement. I think they're the key things. And the sad part is, I think a lot of athletes know that, but it's beyond their psyche and their capability, and they'll probably always be athletes that are almost there but not quite.
With the mobility and the strength, I touched on that before. I just can't remember what you exactly said. What we should be always implementing the two within our weekly program.
Yes, I definitely would, and I would be doing just incorporate it, weave it into the whole thing. Don't necessarily have it as a separate entity. Just weave it in. So at the start of a program, like I've got no hurdlers in my sprint squad, but we do a lot of hurdle work, under, overs and hip mobility work using hurdles, because I want them to be mobile through the hips. I don't want them to go off and do hurdling. But, I think that's one way of doing that. And then at the end of the session, as I said, they do their warm down in bare feet. I'm trying to mobilise ankles and feet, but also then they do a series of set stretching and movement to slow everything down, but to get the range of motion back in there. And they do other stretching away from me, which I think is vital to just maintaining where they're at. Yep.
Are you happy for me to put some links in there to the listeners if they want to come in and to the clinic there in Melbourne, South Yarra, Melbourne, wasn't it? And Double Bay, Sydney? Was it Double Bay?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'd love for you to put one in for my own website so they can come there, and if they've got any questions, give them my email address so they can just email me and ask, what do you think about this? More than happy.
Okay, fantastic. I'll whack those links in there, and I'll once I do the official goodbyes down the line, and I'll grab those off you. Look, thanks heaps for sharing some of your Saturday afternoon with us. I know you're a busy man, so all very appreciative of that.
Always happy to talk about running and performance, and hopefully, look, if people are listening to that and they get one thing out of there, then it's worthwhile. And I'd appreciate any feedback they have, good, bad, or indifferent. And as I said, let's do this together. And I'm sounding a bit like Donald Trump. Sorry. I think we should work as a collective and lift the whole standard of the sport in this country. And if this can get some people moving in that direction, that'd be fantastic.
No, sounds like a great mission, mate. And all the best with that, with your work with Athletics Australia.
Interesting.
It's going to be good to see that happen. And like you said, we need to get the young kids moving more often and probably better. It sounds like a great way to go. So I have no doubt the listeners, including myself, have sort of got a lot of takeaways out of this discussion, mate. So you really appreciate that, Quinny.
My pleasure, mate. Absolute pleasure. Anytime if you want to expand or refine one area, and if you're looking for other people to talk on there, I'm sure I could throw some very unique people in for a roundtable discussion from all different parts of the world if you wanted to do something like that.
Oh, mate, I'll definitely be taking you up on that, mate. So hold the line. I'll grab some details off you. Mm-hmm. But, thanks again so much, Quinny.
My pleasure.
Okay,
great to be with you. Thanks.
Thanks, mate. Mm-hmm.